Hi there. So we're going to look at how to organize your variables a little bit better. So one thing you'll notice is as you start adding more things to your code, it's hard to keep track of all the variables. They get kind of messy, and the variable names get, you start adding on a 1 and a 2 and a, gets hard to keep track of. And so we're going to take this code that I have right now, and I want to teach you a new way to organize your variables that you'll find very helpful as you move into the future. So take a look at this code that's on the screen right now. This is the starter code for this skill, and all it does is move this circle across the screen. This should be pretty straightforward. You can see I've declared a bunch of variables at the top here. I create my canvas, and then draw my background using some of those variables that I created at the top to create the color of the background. And then I draw my circle and move my circle. Pretty straightforward. Now, notice that up here, these three variables, whoops, not those four, these three variables are all kind of related to each other. They're all sort of related to that circle that's going across the screen. Now, the computer doesn't know that, right? Like this X I might have used for the red value of the color. I could put the X in here if I wanted. I could put diameter for the green of the color, right? Like the computer doesn't know that those variables are related. I can do whatever I want with those variables. But conceptually, I know that they're related, and it'll help me work on my program if I could somehow group them together. And so that's what we're going to do here. So I'm going to take these variables out of my code. In fact, instead of deleting them, I'm just going to comment them out so that I can see them. And I'm going to package them together as part of this thing. Let's call it, well, we're working on a game, so let's call this a piece of food that's floating across the screen here. So I'm going to create a new variable called food. And that food, instead of just giving it a number like I've done before, I'm going to use create an open, type an open curly brace. The P5 editor created a closed one for me. I'm going to hit enter. And so what's important now is that I have an open curly brace and a closed curly brace that signify the start and the end of my food. Just like down here, I have an open curly brace and a matching closed curly brace here that signify the start and the end of my setup function, open and closed to signify the start and end of my draw function. You've seen the same thing with like an if statement, right? You have a curly brace to signify the start and the end of an if statement. So I'm going to use those curly braces here to say, signify the start and the end of my food variable. Now, inside that food variable, instead of just storing a number like I did before, I'm going to package together all of the numbers related to the food and put them here. So here's how I write this. X is one of those things. My food has an X value, it has a Y value, and it has a diameter. And I just want to package them all together here so I can say X colon 10, comma. And it's important that you do the, that you type this the way it's typed here. This is just how JavaScript needs to see it. And that's it. Now I've packaged these three variables together inside a food variable. So now I just have a plain old food variable. I can even collapse that using this little arrow on the side to make it a little bit simpler if you want, or you can leave it open. I'm going to get rid of these now because I don't need them anymore. And that commenting was just useful though, so I could look at them as I was creating this. So I'm going to save my sketch and then hit play and see how this looks. I should see the food moving across the screen now, but I don't see anything. Now, I don't even see anything. What do I do? Well, error messages show up in the console down here, and I've collapsed my console. So I'm going to uncollapse the console so I can see what sort of error message JavaScript P5 is trying to give me, and scroll to the top to see the error message. It says uncaught reference error. X is not defined in my sketch on line 18. Okay, so what does this mean? First of all, I'm going to just use this line number to go to line 18. Line 18, and there's a problem on line 18 that it's reporting. It says X is not defined. Okay, right, X is not defined. Well, I mean, it was defined before. Remember when I had X up here? I was defining X. It's not defined anymore. I don't have an X defined. What I have is a food defined, and the food has an X. So the way that I access that X that's stored inside the food object now is I can type, it's called dot notation. I'll type food.x. And that gives me, so I'm going to find my food variable, the cup where I'm storing my food. I can open it up, look inside, and there's my food object. And the food has an X, a Y, and a diameter. So I access that by doing food.y. So what do you think I do here to access the food.x? Sorry, to access the Y variable, I'll do food.y. To access the diameter, I'll do food.diameter. Now let's run it and see what happens. I'll do file, save, push play to run it. And it shows up now, but it looks like I have another error message down here. Do you want to predict what the error is going to be? You might have noticed on line 19, I'm still using X. X isn't defined, so I need to do this food dot in front of the X here to access the X of the food. Now if I run my program, it should work just as it did before. Great, Smith. You made me do all this work. Maybe it even looks a little more complicated, and it does exactly the same thing. What gives? Well, it helps us. You're going to find this enormously helpful as you move on in programming. What you've done here is defined what's called an object. So this is a JavaScript object, and the object, so food holds an object, and inside that object, I have an X, a Y, and a diameter. So that food, I've packaged these variables together, this data together, to show that it's all part of the food. What this allows me to do now is I can a little more easily create another object. Let's say instead of food, let's make it a player. We're building towards a game. The player can start at the same X value, but let's have the player start a little further down on the screen. And let's see, I'll make these different sizes. So the player can be size 10, and the food will be have a diameter. Player will have a diameter 30. Food will have a diameter of 10, and I can play my game. It's cool. Everything's good. I defined player, but I didn't use it down here. So defining a variable and not using it, maybe kind of useless, but it's not an error. The program will still run. So I'm going to come down here, give myself a little white space. Remember, I got to do all this inside the draw function. So I'm looking for, here's my open curly brace for the draw. Here's my closed curly brace. I got to write my code, but inside the draw function right now. And I'm going to just copy this and make this be my player. So I can do player.x, player.y, player.diameter, move my player, and push play. Hey, this is looking good. Now I have a player and food. Let's make the player be a slightly different color. So more yellowish would be like 200, 250 would give us something kind of yellowish, I think, right? Yep. Okay, and let's make the player move towards the food. So we can do player.y gets player.y. What do I want to do? The y value to make the player move towards the food. I'll subtract. Something from the y value to make it move up on the screen. And there we go. Nice. Last thing I want to do here is notice that I've used sort of like line breaks, just like an empty line to kind of group my code down here. So I have that. And I have this. I'm going to add a comment as well in my code to indicate what the different parts of my code are doing. This is useful for other people who are reading your code and for future you who comes back to your code, looks at this and was like, what the heck was I doing here? You can add a comment just to make it clear what the different sections are doing. So I'm going to write here, draw and move the food, and then add another comment down here called boom, boom, draw and move the player. And now I'm just sort of signifying what each of these sections of code are doing. I'm going to do Control S to save it. I can see save now. That's really handy. That's nice and assuring. And there we go. So you may want to think about what else you could do with this program now that we have two objects. Each object has its own data associated with it, and we're moving those two objects around on the screen. What would you want to do with this? Well, we could think about adding a bounce effect on the edges. What happens if they collide with each other? Could you have the user control one of these objects? How do we get the user to control the player? Those are some things, those are some directions we'll head in with this. Okay, that's it for JavaScript objects.